Today, we have the distinct privilege of hosting three accomplished advocates that have risen to prominence and made it big in the space of counsel practice.
So when you're having a down moment, when you feel that this is hard, I can't do this, I can't stay in this, just remember everyone's going through the same thing. Everyone has the same fears. Put your head down, work. There'll be tough times, there'll be better times, there'll be times you're exhilarated, there'll be times you're down on yourself. But just work hard, stay focused.
Moments of doubt and uncertainty are going to be part and parcel of the deal. Only thing you can control is the quality of work that you're putting out there.
Whether you like it or not, even in the beginning, you're always on display. You make a mistake in court, everybody in court knows that in the evening. With that kind of scrutiny, the idea is just to have integrity, drive and hunger to take ownership and be proud about the work that you do.
Hello and welcome to GLC Law and Lore, a podcast where we sit with eminent legal luminaries from the prestigious Government Law College and shine a light on their journeys while also getting to know more about them as people beyond the bands and gowns. Today, we have the distinct privilege of hosting three accomplished advocates that have risen to prominence and made it big in the space of counsel practice at a very young age. Our first guest for today is Mr. Rohan Kama, a name synonymous with commercial litigation. Trusted by attorneys for everything from high-stakes arbitration to complex real estate disputes. An alum of King's College London and a former member of the chambers of senior advocate Darius Kambata. He has worked alongside the likes of Fali Nariman. What many people might not know about him is that he is an avid traveler with a special fondness for Paris, and when he is not drafting his submissions, you might just find him on a paddle court. Our next guest is Mr. Rashman Thandekar, a distinguished first-generation lawyer whose journey took him from the Government Law College to the London School of Economics. He began his career under senior advocate Venkatesh Dhon and has since built a thriving independent practice with a growing number of juniors. Mr. Thandekar has appeared in several high-stakes matters across civil and commercial litigation, intellectual property rights, and arbitration. Outside the courtroom, he is a passionate cricket enthusiast and likes going on safaris, bringing the same dedication to his interests as he does to the law. We also have with us today Miss Anandini Fernandes, a fierce criminal lawyer who started her journey from the chambers of the legendary senior advocate Satish Mane Shinde. Her expertise spans from complex bail matters, high-stakes trials, to constitutional challenges. She is not only a powerful advocate in court, but also a passionate champion to access of justice involved in legal aid. Beyond the courtroom, she is a founder of a remarkable soup kitchen that serves meals across the city. And perhaps most impressively, she is the best mom to Zoe and Bob, her beloved dogs. To break the ice, let's talk about something all of us have in common in this room, GLC. How would you describe your time at the Government Law College? Were there any defining moments or any memories that stand out to you?
Rohan, I'll take that.
Well, for me, honestly, I did the 3-year law course. So really, for me, Government Law College was all told about 1 year before. Then the second year and third year, we started interning. But for me, I just remember the first year being a lot of fun. We didn't do any work. I wasn't working, unlike today's culture where everyone looks to get a job or an internship in the first 3 seconds of joining law college. We didn't do anything for the first year. We hung out a lot in the canteen, ate mediocre idlis, and got by. I just remember it being good fun. I remember a couple of the teachers, not too many of them, to be honest. I remember Mr. Daswani, who was fantastic. And I think he still is. I don't know if I think he's still teaching there. I met him recently. He was absolutely outstanding. I must confess, I don't remember much of anyone else there. But it was a good experience. I had a nice time. Don't remember much else. In the second and third year, we were working, so not much by way of recollection.
I think my if you when somebody says GLC, so far as I am concerned, I think what I sort of immediately recollect is mooting, because I think that's something which I did quite a lot of for all of the 5 years. I think I participated in every other moot that there was to offer, and I think I did perhaps one, if not two, national moots every year. Made great friends around the time. Still friends with a lot of them. Some of them have moved to counsel practice. Some of them are still sort of now briefing attorneys. So it's so that's one thing. And the second thing, of course, is the proximity to the High Court, because I still remember from the first year itself going to court, sitting in courtrooms, trying to see figuring out what's happening, not knowing much about what's going on in terms of the matter, but I still remember distinctly a matter which I didn't know who was arguing with Justice Deshmukh in Court 6, and it was Mr. Khambata versus Mr. Diwan in some matter which I didn't I understood nothing of it, but I was just awestruck. So I think those moments caught of course, and then we started, like Rohan said, with internships, etc., from I think year 2, year 3. So that I think that's really my as soon as you say GLC, that's my recollection of it. Yeah,
Do you think the moots and going to court helped you develop your advocacy skills?
definitely. I think that it readies you to a certain extent. Of course, it's very different when you actually do what you do in court, but it's certainly a it's a facet which you must explore if you really want to. In that sense, ultimately, take up counsel practice. I mean, and it. You read a lot, you study a lot, you participate. The stage fear, arguing matters before somebody, etc. I mean, that's something which you overcome. And just, I mean, it's as close as you can get in college to what ultimately practice has to offer. So, I mean, I'd say you must.
Yeah, I wish I had done some more of that. Because I remember when we did our freshers moot, Vishal Kanade was, I think, secretary at that time, came up to the three of us who did well in the moot and said, look, you guys now have to do a lot more mooting. And we said, yes, Vishal, 100%, and then never did another moot after that. But I wish I had, because I think it does definitely give you a little bit of a grounding when you
And you make great friends. I mean, some of them I mean, you travel with them, you go for national moots, you go outside, they take trains, you travel in whichever ways you have to, and then you do well sometimes up outside and you get that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a great experience. I mean, I'd recommend mooting to everybody in college. And I think GLC has produced some of great mooters along these years. Yeah.
All of you have very different career trajectories. Rohan pursuing a LLM and working at a firm before joining counsel practice, and Rashmin joining counsel practice directly after his LLM at LSE, and Anandini working with Mr. Manishande from her third year of law school. So there's no straitjacket formula to counsel practice. But in your opinion, what are some of the non-negotiables that one must keep in mind before entering this field? It could be, for instance, the knowing the procedural aspects, or finding the right mentor, or building a network.
Yeah, so I don't know if there are any non-negotiables on those terms, because I know, speaking from my own experience, I did not know the basics. I did not know who Mr. Manishande was when I went to give my interview. He was the only criminal law internship on the placement committee, and so I went. So I'm not sure. I think for me, the non-negotiables when entering law is when entering any other profession as a fresher is like, be ready to work hard, bring integrity to what you're doing. So those are the non-negotiables that I think are more relevant. I figured out the rest once I entered the profession. So yeah, I think that's my view.
I don't, personally speaking, I think for anyone who wants to do counsel practice, at least what my advice to them is go join a law firm. Because, counsel practice has this sort of rarefied atmosphere where you're being fed everything, people are coming to you. And I think it's important to start in a firm. I worked with a gentleman called Sanjay Udeshi, and I think he taught me everything I needed to know. From following his clerk around for the first 3 months, I don't think I saw the inside of a courtroom. I just went from department to department. And not to say I became an expert at it, but I think the experience of working ground upwards is invaluable. And that's the thing you have to do in a firm. You start with pagination, you start with learning how to literally make a brief, physically make a brief. And I think that stands you in good stead as you go along the profession. So I always tell people, join a law firm, start from the ground up, and it really helps later in.
Yeah, and I just add to that, even if you enter law school with a notion of what you ultimately want to do, it's important during law school when you have the opportunity to intern to expose yourself to as many different types of internships, because it might not change what you initially thought, it might just reaffirm it, or it might change it. It's very hard to do that once you graduated, not to say that you can't change your line of practice. Of course you can, but it's nice to do that during law school.
I think I agree with both Rohan and Andri, because I think the most important thing, according to me, which is a non-negotiable, is actually drive and hunger. Because you can I mean, I take it that everybody will have a certain set of legal acumen, and you start on the basis that everybody is going to therefore be able to deal with certain legal aspects in a certain manner. But I think what just separates a lot of people is just the drive and hunger. And it's not really hunger for success or hunger to do well. I think it's hunger with respect to taking ownership of your work and just being proud about the work that you do. And I think that then percolates to a lot of other things which you do as, and then this just becomes second nature. Then you don't have to sort of, once you take ownership and pride about what you want to do, and then you have hunger and drive to go about it, then I think that's critical. And of course, I mean, as Rohan said, I mean, you work in a law firm, you work your way upwards, you're an intern, I don't want to say nobody in the sense, but in the sense like from there onwards, and then that's those hard yards. But I think drive and hunger
Yeah,
is
Yeah.
critical.
absolutely.
I mean, without that, you may sort of be the best legal mind, you may be getting the best resources, but if you don't have the will to push, and like I said, it's not will to push in the traditional way of success as we understand, but really you want to do your work well. I mean, it really comes down to that.
Especially in council practice.
Absolutely.
It's so hard in the
It's so cliche, but you got to put in the hard yards. There just isn't an excuse. You can't say, look, I'm not going to do this or cut corners, because if you start doing that from the beginning, that's going to just end up badly for you. You have to start from the beginning of your first internship, really putting in the hard yards, putting in the hard work, being dedicated. As he said, take pride in what you're churning out. Don't just do it because you have to give it to your senior. Do it because you really want it to be good.
And whether you like it or not, even in the beginning, you're always on display.
Yeah.
So both will tell you, you make a mistake in court, everybody in court knows that in the evening. You do 10 matters well, and I don't think so. I mean, the point therefore is, with that kind of scrutiny, the idea is just to be, like he said, have integrity and just sort of have the sort of drive and hunger to take ownership and be proud about the work that you do.
But that's also a message that I keep reiterating. It doesn't matter who the client is, what the matter is, whether a magistrate is going to see your draft or a Supreme Court judge. Ultimately, it's your work. Nobody else might know that it's your work. You might not be the OR, you might have drafted it, someone else files it, but you know it's your work. So go prepared to court, make sure your drafts are good, make sure that you are proud of the work you're putting out. And whether it's a one-page application, you have to, like in criminal law, you give exemption applications every day. But I'm like, it's important that those exemption applications don't have typographical mistakes or, don't misname the parties. So I feel like taking that ownership and making sure you're proud of the work you're putting out there, whether anybody else knows it or not, is essential.
Absolutely. And taking ownership, I think it comes down to that. It's a non-negotiable thing if you want to sort of.
And you also joined the chamber directly and
Yeah.
work at a firm. So do you think it's necessary to first work at a firm, or you can learn when you join it?
So I didn't do that actually. So while I was still in GLC, I was interning with Federal and Rashmikant for about from the second year onwards. So I finished that. Then I did a short judicial clerkship with Justice Khanwilkar
Okay.
before I sort of went for my master's. So I think, so I just did have an idea in terms of what's really going on with practice, etc. You still don't have any idea what it really entails, but you are still on the periphery and you know what's going on. But once I think that's done, once you put in sort of those, I think the skill set which is required in practice and the skill set which is required in a law firm is very different. So I don't really encourage, or I don't really, if somebody is absolutely clear about what they want to do, then they spend some time, as Rohan said, in a law firm, sort of get your act together, but then you move out and then you try and join a good chamber, and then, yeah, you take it from there. Yeah.
Building on that, each of you joined the very esteemed chambers of senior counsels that are Kambata, Venkatesh Don, and Satish Manya Shinde. So was that a conscious decision to work with them? Since mentorship can make or break a junior counsel's career, what guided your choice?
You want to take that first?
So, if you ask me why I chose Darius, I can't pinpoint a specific appearance or a matter where I was blown away, because it was more sort of, I don't know how to put it. I remember distinctly, I have such a clear memory of it. He was appearing in Courtroom 24. I was an intern at the time. And I remember going in, and given that I come from a family which has lawyers in it, it's shocking how little I knew about the profession itself and lawyers in the profession at the time. But I remember seeing Darius arguing a matter, and I remember going back out. I knew who he was, and I remember going back out, going back home that night, telling my dad, telling my mom, I've seen this guy arguing, he was really good, and I'd really like to join him. Do you know him? Can you have a word with him? Can you speak to him? And I think a few months later, then I think we had a word with Darius, and he very sweetly took me in. But I think it was just seeing his general demeanor, the sort of calmness with which he approached the court and the way he addressed the court, I was blown away. So I think that was my main selection. And then once I got in, yes, mentorship is immensely important. And Darius was more of a senior, at least from my point of view, who taught by example. So it's not something that I'd, go to him every day or he'd come and give us long speeches about how it's done. But it was more about just watching him, learning from him, seeing the manner in which he operates, the integrity with which he operates, and more than anything else, the way he operated in the sense of the hard work he put in. Even now, I'd say he probably works longer hours than I do. I see him even now, he works till 9 o'clock at night, works on a Saturday till 4 in the afternoon. So it's that immense hard work that he put in. And I think that we learned a lot more from just watching and observing Darius in conference, in court. And it was that kind of mentorship for us rather than more of the, speaking and guiding kind of mentorship.
By example.
Yeah, absolutely by example, and fantastic example at that. So
I was absolutely sure that I wanted to join Venki, and I'll tell you an interesting nugget. So I was, as I said, at FNR as an intern, and we extensively worked at the relevant time with Venki on a matter. It was the NSCI club matter, some private elections, etc. And I remember some very, very long draft, etc. So spent a lot of time with Venki. And was able to interact with him. And I was at the bottom of the pile, right? As an intern, nobody really bothered. Your job was to make photocopies, ensure that the photocopies are in place. There are 5 photocopies, 4 for the other side, 1 for the judge, or 7 for whatever, all of that, right? And I remember something came up and Venki said that, he was being led by Mr. Rohatgi and Mr. Salvi was opposing them in the Reliance matter. And I happened to tell him that, should Mr. Salvi and Mr. Rohatgi come to Bombay, will you just please let me know because I really want to. And it was just a passing conversation. And after a month, I get a text message from Venki. I still have it. I don't know whether I have it in this phone or not, but I had it for the longest time. And the text message said, if you are free this afternoon, Mr. Rohatgi is coming to lead me in Justice Mohta's court. Mr. Salve is also there. And why don't you if you're free? And I thought that, I thought first is to remember that I had said that. Second, somebody asking an intern, if you are free in the afternoon, I suddenly felt like really important, right? What the hell? And so that was a quality which was really, and it's innate to him. And I have multiple examples. I thought I'd narrate this one. But that's really looking out for people who you don't have to look out for. And we don't have to tell anybody about the volume of the work that, Venki did. We don't have to tell, the quality of the work that he does, everybody knows about it. But I think you want to feel safe in the profession. You want somebody to take care of you in the sense, and just feel tight and safe. I think that was, I'm using, of course, this is a metaphor. There were very many instances in there, why I ultimately decided. So I was very sure before I went for my master's that if given an opportunity, because of course the chambers were full, I didn't know whether I'd get in or not, but if given an opportunity, and Mr. Kalambi from Federal Rashmikant, who fortunately was Mr. Dhon's friend, happened to put in a word for me because I had worked with Federal Rashmikant, so I had some basis in this and there and some little bit of goodwill, if at all I can say that. And then Venki was, of course, I was really glad that I was able to make it. Otherwise, all of us know how tight chambers are, how difficult it is to get, and most chambers are full all the time. So I think that's something, and I think which everybody should look out for, because you will have people who will have incredible amount of work. You will have top lawyers. You will have people, but I still think that you want somebody to look after you in a sense. And I think that's a quality. If you're able to spot it, and if you are able to then that's
a good person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very clear. And that doesn't make him a less of a lawyer, stunning lawyer. But I picked this example because I think that experience with him on that one matter, I was dead sure, given an opportunity, I'd want to join chamber.
I completely resonate with
Yeah.
him for so long.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I already mentioned that I had no idea who Mr. Moneyday was. But that's to say because I didn't come from a legal background, I hadn't been exposed to the law, so I didn't really know anybody. And my juniors still joke that I practice in a bubble. So the thing is, I went like placement committee at JLC. This was the only one thing that said criminal internship. So I went and I applied. And the great thing with Mr. Manishande is he says yes to every intern. Till today, everyone's allowed to come and do at least a month. And then if you want to do longer, then okay, yeah, then he decides whether depending on how many other returns on. But he says yes to everybody. And I think it's so ironic that all of us, when we're talking about our seniors, while we all know that they're great lawyers and there's so much that everybody already knows about them, the thing that resonated with us is the type of people they are. And just like Rohan mentioned, it's not like Mr. Manish and they sat me down and taught me the law, said that this is what you do and this is how you do it. He taught me by example, and then he put his faith in me to get the job done when it came to my turn. And that trust it's a great learning. Like, to have that trust, you want to do everything in your power every day to be worthy of it and keep it intact. So that was how he taught me. And I think with Mr. Maneshande, more than, everyone has an impression of who he is as a person and he has this public perception. But, he's the person who's in our office will sit down and make bail for everybody, who knows everybody's family members, who knew all of my boyfriends along the way and had opinions on which ones were good and which ones were not. He knows he was the first one at my wedding and the last one to leave. He's interested in our lives.
Absolutely.
He's interested in us having a life beyond the law and beyond the chamber and beyond the courtroom. So yeah, I unfortunately did not give it much thought and I did not pursue him specifically. But I say this often, one of the things I'm most grateful for in my life is my senior, and it was Piola.
Thank you so much. Now let's talk about the gestation period that inevitably comes with counsel practice. So how does one sustain financially, emotionally, and mentally during these early years of struggle? Specifically for Rashmina and Nandini, you were first generation lawyers. So was it trickier? Did you face any issues? And compared to your peers, did you think it was harder for you?
Okay. So, I think that every situation comes with its own challenges. I was a first generation lawyer that had some challenges, but I can well imagine that even if you come from a legal family, that has its own challenges. So, not to say that one is easier or more difficult. I feel like in terms of how you sustain as a first generation lawyer, I have to always be aware that I came from a certain level of privilege. Like, I remember 1 to 2 years into practice when I was not earning anything, and my friends who joined law firms and were earning good salaries, I remember going to my mom and being like, should I switch? Because financial independence was something that was very important to me. And I was like, am I going to get it? And when am I going to get it? So I went to my mom and I was like, I'm still living off yours. Should I switch? And, my mom in that moment, she was like, are you enjoying what you're doing? And I was like, I love it. Like, it's what I want to do. I love it. And she was like, okay, but then back yourself. If you're not going to back yourself to, be able to turn something you love into something that's financially viable for you in the long run, and we're here to support you through that journey. So I think that because I had that privilege, it was easier for me. I do feel that if you come from different circumstances, yes, a chamber practice has more challenges than if you graduate and you join and you have a law firm and you have a fixed salary at the end of the day. During COVID, work suddenly dried up. I didn't think at 30 I'm gonna like dip into my savings, and then there was like 6 months of virtually no litigation work happening. So it does have its challenges, and I think you have to see what works best for you.
I think on the question of you said whether there was a gap or whether there was sort of harder, I don't particularly think that there was a gap or that it was harder in that sense, because like she said, I think that challenges at every level. I think there are two reasons predominantly for this. One, of course, I think after the masters, and after I was back, I think I was a little ready in the sense of the term, not sort of meaning you can never be ready for what you have to, but I say I was comfortable. As she also said, in terms of, I mean, we come from a position of privilege. We were not really, was from Bombay, we had a house, etc. You don't really have, beyond the point, you didn't have to fend for all of that. And the second thing, again, I must stress, is I had a superb ecosystem in chamber, which really ensured that at no point in time did I feel either out of work, or even to the extent that I felt that no, there is no proper remuneration for what what I was doing, because we were the tightest of chambers in the sense that, and I'm sure the chambers were as tight as well, but great group of friends, with Venki at the helm. We were, like I said, I mean, we always in that sense felt looked after, and we were sort of drafted in matters very organically in that sense, not sort of at somebody's expense, but we were getting to be able to do work. And we were also, I remember I joined on a Monday, so vividly, and Venki, he had a personal matter before the estate officer of one of Shanaz's wife's relatives on a Thursday. And he just told me that you're going to argue this before the estate officer on Thursday. I had no idea what a public premises matter was, who's this estate officer was. And he said, there's some leave, 440, 441, whatever leave is, just figure that out. And I said, I don't know what leave. I don't know 441. So we just got ready. And so basically, I think that there was a system in place organically where, and I think that's something which everybody going forward as well needs to try and see if they can put it in place for their own chambers going downwards. Because I think once you have people feeling safe in an environment, you will 100%, there are that much more chance for them to flourish, because you know that you're not going to sink. The biggest worry is what if, right? I mean, what if this doesn't take off? What if I don't have work? What if tomorrow nobody, or but if that's really taken care of, then have to focus on work. And if you're able to create that environment around you, I mean, that's critical. I mean, I can go on and on with examples, but I mean, I think that's really
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's like I have a similar anecdote. The day I got my Sanad, I called Mr. Manish in there to be like, I got my Sanad. He's like, all matters are in the diary today. And I'm like, this. He's like, this one, you go up here. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, go. You don't think you can handle it? I was like, no, I think I can handle it. He's like, go.
exactly.
So yeah, that makes a huge difference.
And also, I'll tell you, as a matter of course, I think that it's not very difficult for a senior, and you will, as you go up the ladder hierarchy a little bit here and there, you also realize it's not that difficult to draft juniors into matters. It's not difficult to ensure that your juniors or juniors around get paid briefs. It's also not difficult to ensure that there is some sort of remuneration which you are able to sort of a channel which you can open. And if you're conscious about it, then I mean, it's not.
But I will add, I think also a large part of it is you have to be mentally tough, because there are days, and I mean, I don't know, I'm sure all of us have gone through, the profession itself can sometimes make you very insecure.
Sure.
And as we always joke, especially in the younger days, you look around the table and you look at everyone in the library and everyone's working hard, and you think to yourself, my God, why are they all working so hard? Where are these briefs? Why am I not seeing any of them? So you got to be mentally tough. You got to keep telling yourself, it's okay. I don't have one today, but I'll get one tomorrow, especially in the early years.
Yeah.
So I think getting through that gestation period, it's important to keep telling yourself, you know what, stay at it, do the hard work. Eventually it'll come. Even to this state, I mean, I'd say till about 5 years ago, and I've been doing it now for almost 20 years. I'd say till about 5 years ago, at the start of a new term, I'd be thinking in my head, I'd sometimes ask my wife, Chalo, I hope this term goes as well as the last term has, So you're always a little bit insecure in this.
that entirely.
It never does end. I think if you speak to lawyers who've been doing this for 50 years, they'll tell you that if they have a slow week, they'll be thinking in their head, okay, what's going on? Why is this not happening? So I think at every level, you have to be mentally tough. You got to tell yourself this will happen. And I remember Naushad, the engineer, telling me once, he said, this was right when I had started. And he said, you know what, you'll go through about 4 or 5 years of your practice. And at that point, you look back and you'll say, okay, now I actually have a practice. And I think that's happened to most of us, where you sort of get through those initial tough years and then you realize, all right, I've come across to the other side. Yeah.
stuff. I mean, it's really, I mean, nobody here, I mean, I'm sure, and everybody who's out there trying to do what they're doing day in, day out has gotten anywhere without putting in the hard yards. And everybody has luck. Luck has a,
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no doubt about
You need two things, I think. You need luck and you need a person to, you need some people to back you. I mean, I remember in my initial days, Sanjay Bhai just used to throw briefs at me and say, Jao Dikra, argue. I said, but like Rashman said with the estate officer, I said, I have no clue what I'm doing here, you know? And he said, no, it's okay. You read, you'll figure it out. What's the big deal? Go, argue. And I think you need a bit of that. And you need, obviously, as I said, luck as well. You need to be sometimes in the right place
yes.
where you get an opportunity, senior doesn't turn up, or your senior puts you onto a matter and then for some reason he's not there, and you get a chance to impress the attorney or something like that. So it all sort of mixes together.
Yeah. I think the larger point of it, and make is moments of doubt and uncertainty are going to be part and parcel of the deal. I mean, our seniors also have them with all of their years of practice. So that's a natural thing. And I mean, the realistic aspect is you might have a slow month. You might have a great month and you might have a slow month, but your cost of living, your SIPs are the same every month. So yeah, it happens. It happens to me even now. It's not like I'm like, oh no, it's all good. I'm making the bank. So yeah, I think that uncertainty happens, but yeah, you have to back yourself. And I feel, yeah, I mean, those moments do happen when you're in court and you're like, okay, so someone's getting so many briefs. And like, you know, what I tell people also, I was like, the only thing you can control is the quality of work that you're putting out there. You can't control how many clients are coming to you, who's referring you, but you can control how you're arguing in court, how you're drafting, and what quality of work you're putting on that. So focus your energy on that, and then luck is required.
Yeah. Rohan said, I mean, you need somebody to back you. It could be a law firm, as Rohan said in his case, could be somebody else. I mean, and you have to be lucky. You have to be at the right place at the right time. And your senior ought not to turn up at the right time. So you get some opportunity to open your mouth and argue something. I mean, there are a host of things. Everybody's trajectory in practice is very different.
Yeah.
Somebody sort of blooms slightly late and sort of goes on to become an absolute stalwart. Somebody picks up slightly earlier and then stagnates.
Yeah.
Or somebody, I mean, it's so you have to sort of just navigate this whole thing, right? Yeah.
Just building on that, how does one deal with the constant fear of whether their practice will succeed or not? Have any of you contemplated moving to non litigation or law firm roles? What factors influence these kind of thoughts or decisions?
Well, my wife's a corporate lawyer. I see what she does and I know just how badly I don't want to do that. So, because it, firstly, from the time she started, my God, the way they work, I thought we work hard, but you know, I'd literally see her maybe 1 hour in a week sometimes. She'd be coming home at 3 and back at work by 7:38, 9 in the morning. So that was definitely a deterrent. But I think honestly, for me personally, even in the sort of weaker moments or the tougher moments, I was quite firm in my decision. I knew that this was the only thing I wanted to do. For me, part of the joy of law has always, or a large part of it has always been standing up in court, arguing. That's the reason I do this. That's the reason I wake up in the mornings to do this job. So I don't think it was ever an option to turn away from it. I don't think I ever thought of leaving it. But I certainly did have, as we've all said, many moments of self-doubt, many moments where you question yourself and wonder if it'll all be okay. And that's normal. That I think is in fact good because that sort of drives you. I feel like it's those insecurities that push you forward and make you want to work hard. Yeah, I think those little bit of butterflies in your stomach, yeah, and also a little bit of uneasiness about not knowing where this is heading, etc., particularly in the beginning of the practice, is not really a very bad thing if you can sort of manage it. Of course, if it gets to an extent where it's really affecting your sort of mental health, etc., that's another matter altogether. I'm not sort of taking it there, but uh, sort of short of that, a little bit of sort of doubt, etc., as Rohan said, really helps you push that much more. And it's not so. I don't think even in my case that that I didn't ever contemplate quitting practice to do non-litigation work. I think, as Rohan said, I really, in the sense, wanted to do what we do day in, day out, and I was pretty clear about it. But that's not to say that you didn't have bad days. And again, I mean, I want to repeat because I mean, people who want to sort of take up counsel practice and look. I mean, I think you need to have an ecosystem where you really are able to let juniors and others flourish.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I feel the same way. I mean, there's a certain level of self awareness that you have to have in dealing with these questions. For me, I think because I was so unaware when I came to the profession, for me, the whole idea of a lawyer was someone who goes to court and argue. So for me, it took a lot of awareness and seeing my friends to realize, oh no, there are all of these different ways in which you can practice the law. And one of my biggest joys is going to court and arguing. So, like, I'm one of those people who are very excited when it's Monday. So, for me, I've never really had doubts about this is what I really want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Drafting is often said to be the backbone of a junior counsel's life. How important do you think are strong drafting skills in this profession? I ask this because most junior lawyers and students don't get an opportunity to draft. So how can one build on this skill and flourish in it?
The skill is critical. I mean, there's no, I think, and I tell sort of colleagues, juniors, and we've been hearing it in chamber all the while that I think a good drafting can take you places as a junior counsel, because that's really, you don't have good draftsmen, draftswomen, uh, as many as you would sort of really want. And therefore, that's really a commodity which is really in demand. And if you're able to, therefore, draft well, it really can uh, take you places. And I remember, I mean, with in sort of with me, I remember first, no, maybe first, second, third, whatever, draft being corrected and sat down, and then, of course, it was physical correction. And uh, I remember Venki looking at me, smiling, and just canceling the whole first page. And then that was a time where you didn't have all of this track changes, etc. So you wrote down changes. So it made it even worse, because then 20 minutes on page one and then overleaf, looking up and then cancelling the full thing and then writing the whole thing again. And then you see those drafts. You see what changes are made.
Yeah.
You realize where you went wrong, etc. Of course, that's the benefit that you have when you are in chamber. For somebody like, I think, interns was your question. I think you probably, I mean, read more drafts. One, of course, if you have access to those drafts, or you maybe read more judgments, legal literature, hone your sort of, if you're able, I mean, your vocabulary, I mean, etc. Because I think drafting and conveying what you have to in sort of in the most pithy manner is an art.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I would say just do more of it. It doesn't matter if your draft, if you actually have an opportunity. I'm sure no senior in a law firm, no senior associate will ever say, look, I don't want to see your first cut. If you show the initiative and say, look, I want to do this, it really doesn't matter. You know what? Take a crack at it. Then see the draft that your senior's done. See what you've missed. Maybe compare it. I say this only from the point of view of your question about what an intern can do. Just sitting back and saying, oh, look, I don't get an opportunity, that's no good. Make an opportunity for yourself. Maybe what you can do is see your seniors draft, say, I had an idea, I just wanted to run it past you, without, of course, sounding like you're correcting his or her draft. But take the initiative, I think, as a junior. And I think what Rashmin said is also so important. Study back the drafts that come. I mean, it's the most gut-wrenching experience seeing a draft that you sent out and we've all read. I think Rashmin and I have probably had more experience of working with Freddie Divitri. I don't know if I've done too much criminal, but I love the man. But it's the most heartbreaking thing to send a draft to Freddie, because it comes back and he's so sweet. He'll say, Dika, I just made a few language changes, the way I like to say it. And I swear you can't see the black print on the draft. And he writes in red, so you see red across it, on the print, under the page, behind the page. It's the whole draft is red. But the good thing is when you read it back, you realize that, not one of those changes is incorrect. It just made the draft so much easier and so much better to read. So I think it's important to learn from the drafts that you see or that you've done, which are corrected.
So I want to add here that, of course, good drafting is integral. But I want to say that it goes hand in hand with reading and understanding the matter. The point that I can't emphasize enough is don't get the papers and start drafting. Spend time with the client, read the papers. You will see how much easier. I know exactly when I read a draft when my junior has understood the matter versus when they are confused about the exact details of the matter, and it reflects in the quality of your draft. So I'm like, spend those 3 hours with the client, hash it out, make sure you completely understand the matter and the point that you're trying to make. Make sure you research the law, you study your papers. The drafting part becomes so much easier, so much less time consuming if you understood the matter, if you know the prevailing law of the on the point, and if you know what it is you want to say. And as far as juniors getting an opportunity, so for me, yes, in our chamber, what we have started doing is once or twice a week, I have a sit down with the interns, because I definitely want the interns to have learned something during their internship. So what we do is, if like I cover, bail, anticipatory bail, quashing, because these interns come every month, so it's not possible to do more nuanced things, but definitely bail, anticipatory bail, quashing, and drafting are stuff that I cover. And then I'll give them like an FIR to read and tell them this is the format, now draft a bail. And then we sit down and discuss it. Also, I feel like, yeah, and for the interns who come and tell me, okay, ma'am, you gave me this feedback, can I edit it and send it back to you? Yeah, of course, and we'll discuss it. But that, like Rohan said, that initiative is needed. I'm not going to go to 6 interns month on month and be like, okay, I've done this, now I'll do this additional step for you also. But it's very unlikely that you'll go to someone. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are all sorts of people in the world, but I'm saying it's very unlikely that you'll go to a senior and say, could you look at this, or could I have a crack at this? And they'll be like, no, absolutely not. Like, that would be unfortunate if
Yeah,
that happened.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, and specifically to answer what the interns could do, I think the easiest way is to do a list of dates.
Right.
For that, you don't need anybody's, you just need a brief. Now, most briefs are soft copies, briefs are always accessible. And Ron will tell you that list of dates is not really an index. Making a list of dates itself is very important. How you place it, what is your case, how you anticipate the defense, what are your notes, what do you want to highlight to the court, etc. And even there is so much to learn, and that I think is accessible to anybody. In terms of, so you don't really have to get to planes, affidavits, etc. because intern generally are for a month, month and a half, sometimes 2 months, etc. So you don't really always even get to see your draft through and through. But list of days for matters which are listed in the week is not really a very difficult thing to start.
And now, because of e-filing, everyone has soft copies and drafts. So even if at the bare minimum, if you're being sent to court to attend a matter, ask for the soft copy, read the draft.
Right.
I've benefited so much from reading different people's drafts, reading their style of drafting. So just that at the very least is something that's easy to do.
Right. This question is specifically for Anandini. So, even though we are seeing more and more women enter litigation today, when it comes to counsel practice, the gender ratio still tilts heavily towards men. Especially in criminal practice, a lot of women are wary of entering it. So, what is your take on this?
So for me, I come from a chamber where there are 5 women and 2 men, now 3. And predominantly in my chamber, there's always been more women. Also, some of the junior counsels that I really admire are women. There is a gender disparity, but I think that's across the profession. I think when it comes to criminal law, across genders, there is a certain amount of wariness. I think for me, I think a lot of that is just the perception. I mean, I've heard all of the jokes, if you're a criminal lawyer, say you're a criminal or you don't have a conscience. I think a lot of that is a perception issue. Personally, in my profession, I have never felt unsafe. I have to be cognizant of the fact that, from the get-go, I was associated with an esteemed senior, so that came with some level of protection. I came from privilege, so I had a car and driver taking me everywhere. So I did have that protection. But I've had this discussion with interns who come into the profession, with other juniors. Nobody, you hear of these very unfortunate incidents of, people losing their lives and stuff. And so that does make people wary. But I personally have not felt unsafe. I don't think criminal practice in general is an unsafe profession to enter. I encourage people, who have an interest to pursue it. The profession could benefit from it, whether that's men or women. I think there are a lot of factors. I feel like one of the things is, it doesn't pay as well initially, especially as a corporate practice. Courts are not how they are in Suits and Ali McBeal and the practice. They're hot. They're, like on the weekends, I just love having personal space. Most of the time, I have no personal space. So I think there are a lot of factors as to,
And like you're dealing with criminals.
yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not one of those professions that you can do like off the cuff. I think you have to have some passion for it and some inclination to really pursue it because it's very specific.
Beginning
Yeah.
with the next segment of our podcast, we would now like your take on certain contemporary legal issues. Starting with Rohan first, you often appear in a lot of family disputes. So, partition suits often require a delicate balance between the rigid statutory law and the emotionally charged parties. In your view, how can courts navigate this complex interplay to achieve both legal rigor and equitable and amicable solutions? And what role do you think a council plays in bridging the gap between these legal constraints and the heightened emotions of the parties?
So I think there are quite a few things in there, but I think essentially, especially in family matters, I think as a counsel, you play a very important role before you step into the court. Because especially in family matters where emotions are high, where parties, you know, very often lose their balance a little bit, I think it's your job as a counsel or any advocate really to sit your client down, firstly, calm them down, tell them what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate, what can be done, what can't be done, what is an absolutely unreasonable stand to take, even if the emotions are charged, even if you feel your brother, sister, mother, father has slighted you. And I think another aspect that's so important outside of court is to try and close the gap between the family members because I truly believe, and to each his own, but I truly believe that it's important as a lawyer not just to argue your matter in court. So much of it is what you do outside because your client looks to you for a lead. If you try and bring about a rapprochement between the parties, if you suggest to your client, look, sit down, at the end of the day this is your mother, this is your father, or that you're going to fight for the next 20 years, neither of you is going to benefit from this property, sit down, try and work it out. I think more than the job we do in court, that's quite crucial. And I think once you're in court, really the court plays a similar role. I think it's important that the entire ecosystem functions together. So even in court, most of our judges will always try and bridge the gap between parties, especially when it's family. Our law requires it. The CPC requires in family matters to suggest mediation. And I think our courts are now more and more seeing the value in that. And even there, as a counsel, I think it's important. Some people believe, and to each his own, that my job ends when I've stepped out of court. I don't take part in mediations. I don't take part in settlements. I don't agree with that. I believe that part of your job as a lawyer is to actually bring your client that final resolution. And if that can be done by sitting across a table, so be it. So to me, a court's function also is very important. And I think when they push parties together, give them, sometimes a little bit of a stick and carrot treatment where a little bit of a push. Some of our judges, I won't say who right now, used to be excellent at this stick and carrot method. I think you all know who we're talking about. But they'd actually push parties to settle. So I think a court's role there to bring about not just pass a judgment or argue a matter as a lawyer. That's the easy part. The hard part is to actually sit them down and bring them together, force parties to settle and close out matters. I think that's crucial in these family and partition sort of matters.
Moving to Rashman now, you appear in a lot of intellectual property matters. The commercial exploitation of personality rights has grown significantly in the recent years. Yet, India's current intellectual property laws, like trademarks, passing off, and copyright, don't seem to fully address these emerging concerns. With the rapid technological advancements and market changes, how well do you think are existing IP laws protecting personality rights?
So, I mean, you asked this question, and I've had the opportunity recently to appear in a couple of, I think probably that's why the question also asked. I've had the opportunity to appear in few of these matters in the Delhi High Court as well as some matters before the Bombay High Court. And I think uh, there is a lack of clarity. And I don't think that the current regime adequately is able to answer some of the questions which arise in such kind of matters where you are looking to protect personality rights. And the main difficulty is, again, slightly nuanced now, I don't know if in terms of the audience, but the main difficulty is that there are courts which have said that the source of personality right is really in the law of privacy, Article 21. And there's another line which perhaps is slightly more appropriate line, and if I can say that, is where they root it in the right to property. And really those are two completely different aspects, privacy and property. And there is, of course, there is an overlap, and it's not that straitjacket, because then the difficulty is with respect to anything that really finds its source in privacy is not inheritable. It's not something which, whereas property is of course tangible and therefore heritable, and there is complete lack of clarity. There is, even in America, courts have taken a different view throughout. Some courts have said it's heritable, some courts have said privacy, some courts have said property. In India, there are sort of, we have, I mean, we approach, there are judgments which have approached this on both fronts by saying it is also a right of publicity, but that's not really a trademark right. Trademark is really indication of source, where this is really trying to protect commercially your property, your likeness, your sort of persona, etc. So, although there will be some overlap, the contours are, I mean, they are literally in that sense different aspects. So we are looking for source in maybe some trademark law or common law in passing off, or generally the law on property, etc. But you do, in that sense, need some clarity. There is so you had 1994, you had Rajagopal, then recently Puttaswamy, who have slotted it again, privacy, etc., some aspects. But you just need it authoritative pronouncement even from the Supreme Court, because there is, in that sense,
Or some statutory regime.
or some statutory regime, I mean, which, I mean, just a carve out for something like this may be difficult, but there, in that sense, needs to be some clarity. And whoever's interested, there's actually a very scholarly article written by Miss Nina Nariman on this in 2022, which really highlights this sort of distinction. So, I mean, if somebody's interested, you can sort of pick that up and then draw from there. Of course, and that's 2022. There was no Puttaswamy, and there's a lot of development after that. We've appeared in some matters which have taken the law forward after that. But to understand this dichotomy and sort of this conundrum between privacy and property, and what really are the consequences of it, maybe that's something which somebody may want to pick up and read. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, coming to the last question of this segment, Anandini, you've been involved in a lot of pro bono work for the Legal Aid Department of the High Court. We have noticed that in several cases, accused are granted bail after long delays, and their trial is going on for extended periods of time, and they are in jail without being proven guilty. What, in your view, are the key reforms needed to address this issue and ensure that the justice system doesn't penalize individuals for delays beyond their control, especially when they are not proven guilty?
So, see, it's definitely an issue that plagues our system is procedural delays, lack of access to a lawyer, lack of awareness of your rights. So, these are issues. In terms of governmental reform, there are a lot of reforms. It's about their implementation. The Supreme Court keeps coming out with directives about, automatically just releasing prisoners from jails across the country where they've served more than half of what they would of the maximum sentence they could get were they to be convicted. So there are all of these reforms, and it's just about making sure there's greater implementation. I would say something that I always think is like, when you study medicine, when you graduate or just before you graduate, there's a requirement to serve a certain number of hours that doctors do in government hospitals, or as a pilot, fly for a certain number of hours. I would like to see at some point, because there are a lot of people joining the profession, I would like to see, colleges or universities taking that initiative of making sure that fresh graduates do a certain number of dedicated pro bono hours, because it could really help the system. A lot of the times, what is missing is someone is in jail and about filing a one-page application to say, this is why I'm here, this is how long I've been here, I should be released. And a fresh law graduate has the ability to do that. And that could make a world of difference. I feel that even as people in the profession who are practicing criminal law, I do feel please look at it more of a vocation, not to say, don't worry about, bringing in the money and supporting yourself, but do take on pro bono matters. Mr. Manishilde is great like that. He'll do a lot of pro bono work. In our chamber, we do a lot of pro bono work. Like it's not necessary for nameless, faceless people. There are a lot of people within your circle, people you employ, people who work for you, your friends employ, who require that legal aid. So it's not always about the large picture. Sometimes those issues are bigger and seem more insurmountable. But even within your own circles, think of ways. I always tell people coming into the profession, like, I've never taken an adjournment in 13 years of practice. I was like, the system has intrinsic delays. Don't make it worse. Go for your matters. Prepare. A witness doesn't come, that's not in your hands. But don't let a witness come and adjourn the matter, right? So I do feel like my advice to fresh graduates who are joining the legal profession is there's already a lot of delays. Don't add to them. Do as much of pro bono work as you can. Join the High Court Legal Aid Committee. It's so great. I mean, even if you don't have the altruistic aspect of it, when you start out in the profession, you're hungry for briefs.
Correct.
This is a great way. You get face time in front of judges. You're arguing different matters. So even if you don't want to do it, for altruistic purposes, just do it for that. It's a great learning. Judges are very, even if you're a fresher and you're appearing and it's a legal aid matter, most judges are very understanding. They're appreciative of what you're doing. They're ready to help you, to nod. Like, you'll very rarely see, a judge coming down harshly on someone who's appearing in a legal aid matter. So do it. I mean, I think the legal aid requirement for the High Court is 3 years of practice. So I tell everyone, once you're done with your 3 years of practice, please join the legal aid committee. If nothing else, do at least that. So yeah.
Now, as we come to the end of our podcast, let's switch some gears and jump into the rapid fire round. The key is to not think too much and answer with the first thing that comes into your mind. If you could swap roles with anyone in court for a day, who would it be?
Judge, for sure.
How would you explain litigation to someone who's never heard of it?
Don't do it.
What is your go-to snack during long case preparations?
Water.
Coffee.
Mine sadly is Kantil in court. That's all I end up eating.
One book you would recommend to every law aspirant?
So I read Mr. Nariman's Before Memory Fades. It's not a funny answer, but it's a damn good book. And it tells you some things as young lawyers you just shouldn't do, which is great.
Yeah, I don't really read that much, those many legal books, but I also really enjoyed Before Memory Fades, and I enjoyed Mr. Jake Malani's book also. I can't remember the name. He wrote a autobiography, which was really interesting.
Your favorite co-counsel to do a matter with?
Darius Khambata Aspich, you have to do absolutely nothing.
See, I think Atul Zapurkar brothers, in conferences you feel like furniture because they're fully ready.
Your favorite chamber tradition?
I think favorite chamber tradition, I think more than favorite, I think the fact that all of us did lunch together every single day is something.
Yeah. So because of the nature of our work, we're not in office at lunchtime, but like evening snack. We're all big evening snackers and we all do it together.
I get into trouble for this. I don't do the joint lunch. I'm doing a conference during lunch. So
The most unexpected skill you used during a case? Something not related to law, any skill is here.
I think in general, I used to do a lot of elocution in school. So I think I've just used it for the last 20 years of my practice. This is oratory skills. I mean,
Yeah. I just want to say most of my clients appreciate skills of mine that have nothing to do with the law. It's like punctuality, good communication, meeting your deadlines, not necessarily legal skills. It's just life skills.
A practice area you would secretly love to try just once?
Tax.
just once. I'd like to actually
That's
try
the
criminal
operative
law.
part.
I've never done much of it. I'd like to try criminal law. Seems interesting.
If you could have a theme song play every time you enter a courtroom, what would it be?
This Is Me by from The Greatest Showman. It was my wedding entry song also, but it's relevant to my life.
I guess I have the tiger or something that was to pump you up and make you hot in.
If not law, what career would you have chosen?
I would have been on ESPN running a sports center show as an anchor. That would have been my dream job.
So he'd be the anchor and he'd be commenting on me. So I'm
Go, because you'd be the owner. Author, it's still something that I hope to do at some point. Yeah.
Now, as we come to the end of our podcast, I just want to ask you if you have any advice for the listening law aspirants or the fresh graduates.
I thought that's what we did for the last song. But okay, so I'll go first.
Yeah.
I think hard work is the obvious one. Patience, because you need a lot of it in this field. Don't get down on yourself. I'll just quickly end with one of these anecdotes that I remember they attributed to Ashok Desai, but I don't know if it's true or not. It's about having patience and not stressing out about the fact that you don't have work. Someone once said that he was sitting in the library and talking to one of his juniors, and he was looking around, and the junior said, Ashok bhai, what do I do? I'm just seeing all these people around me, and everyone looks like they've got so much work and they're working so hard. And he said, don't worry, beta. They're all looking at you and thinking the same thing. So when you're having a down moment, when you feel that this is hard, I can't do this, I can't stay in this, just remember everyone's going through the same thing. Everyone has the same fears. Put your head down, work. There'll be tough times, there'll be better times, there'll be times you're exhilarated, there'll be times you're down on yourself. But just work hard, stay focused. And above all else, I think for any junior starting this profession, stay true to yourself, hold on to your integrity, because there will be many times that it's put to the test. Many times you think, should I cite this one judgment, though you know that there's perhaps some distinguishing feature. At your initial years, you have to maintain your integrity. If you lose that and you slip over to the other side, then it's a slippery slope. So at all costs, whatever you do more than anything else in this profession, stay true to yourself and keep your integrity high. That's what I would say.
I think your question is specifically with respect to counsel practice in that sense, right? So I think also, and I concur with everything that Rohan has just said, but I also think that invest some more time in picking the correct chamber, because ultimately it's really you. A lot of times people don't know, and people sort of join places for right or the wrong reasons. There are sort of, I mean, you need to know why you are going to be in a particular place, because it's cliche, right? That you basically are really married to that chamber. I mean, you use it all the time, but you're there, you're stuck. So you need to therefore just be in the right environment, which will let you flourish. So as much, I mean, you do all the hard yards, and when you're sort of looking to sort of take off, you please find yourself in the right place and for the right reason. So if you're clear about why you want to be in a particular place, that'll really help, because then there would be no question marks once you get there. Because otherwise, the feeling of getting stuck at a place where you don't want to be and the surroundings, it will just complicate matters and make it that much more difficult for you to thrive.
Yeah, so obviously I agree with both of them. For me, like I said in the start, like hard work and integrity are the non-negotiables. This profession and for any profession, I feel never get complacent, never go to court unprepared. Don't ever just go to court having read only the list of dates, read your brief. Like those are the things which I really feel are like very, very important. And I feel like the one thing that I truly believe is, like I've said before, focus on your work and be happy for everybody else.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your answers and being so open, honest, and candid with them. This was indeed an insightful episode, and we hope it was as interesting for you as it was insightful.
It was.
For us.
Thank you.
It was, Bucky, you did a great job. Thank you.
Super.
Thank you so much, viewers, for tuning in. This is Paki for Law and Lore signing off.